This is PJ Souls, and you are totally listening to Without Your Head, Horror Radio.
This is Betsy Palmer, and I'm not sorry that I lost my head. It's been worth every moment of it.
All right, and we're back once again here at Without Your Head, and we're joined by composer Alan Howarth. How are you doing?
Hey, Neil. I'm doing good.
Excellent. Now, currently, you did the score for the movie Brutal.
Yes, sir.
We've seen the movie. Really good horror film. Nice little twist. Everything. We just talked about it with the lead earlier. How did you get involved in the movie?
Well, Michael Stevens approached me actually about another one of his productions called The Haunted Caves. Oh, maybe about 3 years ago. And he's he really loves the script. He showed it around, but because he hadn't directed before, most of the potential producers wanted somebody else to direct. So he sat down for a minute and he said, okay, I can write a script that I can direct. I can do it on a low budget. And so with the concept of low budget, he created the story of Brutal. And called me up and said, listen, I know I want you to do my bigger movie, but would you do this little one just to help me along? And because I liked him and I liked his dad, Richard, who's the executive producer, I agreed to jump in. Everybody needs a break. I liked Michael. I liked his ideas. So I agreed to score it for him. And then I wound up doing all the sound, actually.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you do a score for a movie, do you typically watch the movie and write the music, or do you write the music first for the movie, or how does that work?
Well, first I do is I'll just watch the movie, because I've got to have some sort of feel. So the first time you watch the movie is really the only time you're in the audience until you're far done with it, and you might be in the audience again. But once you get involved and start pulling it apart scene by scene, this by that, you're into it. Mm-hmm. So having watched the movie once, then offline, not to the movie, but just kind of fooling around, going for the muse and the inspiration, come up with usually some sort of very simple theme. Remember, I worked with John Carpenter throughout the 80s, and one of the lessons I learned from him is minimalism, how to get a lot out of very little. And in the case of a horror movie, that's what you want. You have to allow space, you have to allow silence. So I dialed up something that was working for me. It was a combination of a horror show, but it was spooky too, because the scare part of it is really the theme of the movie is somebody's gonna die. Mm-hmm. And so you want to set up a musical theme that's pretty repetitive in this case, because the movie, I'll say 3/4 of it takes place in a basement with just these two guys. Mm-hmm. So we don't have a lot of scope to go out to the beach and up to the building and out to the parking lot and down to the church. It's just all pretty much in one room. So it wants to be repetitive, but it wants to be a theme that you can work as a musical piece. So that's what I came up with. You hear the opening theme right out of the gate in the opening credits, and then it kind of tucks under and goes into some rhythms, and it plays peekaboo with the rhythms and the effects. Remember, I'm also a sound effecty guy, so sound effects and music are kind of all the same to me. So the weaving of effects and music and rhythm and start and stop is what makes a horror movie score go. Mm-hmm. And then you also got to remember you got to stop sometimes. Just let it be quiet, so you don't load up the whole movie with music, because at that point the music tends to go away. If it's just always there, you don't pay attention to it anymore. So it's the ebb and flow with the action on scene. Mm-hmm. But pretty much the same theme, the main theme, goes from the beginning to the end. And a musician might think, well, that's kind of boring. You didn't do any new music, But from an audience standpoint, the theme becomes familiar. Mm-hmm. It tells the story. One of the great examples is the Halloween theme. It's very simple. Had a little twist to it. Bum 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 bum. Whenever you hear that, that's Halloween. And in the movie, whenever you hear that theme, Michael Myers is on his way. Mm-hmm. So using those sort of musical tools, that's where I approached Brutal from.
Yeah. The fact that most of the movie is in one location, does that make it harder or easier for you?
Well, it's actually more challenging in that you've got to work it. You just don't turn on a riff and let it go. You've got to orchestrate and take the theme through several different instrumentations and several different versions: the big version, the little version, the creepy version, the sneaky version, the anticipatory version. But that's how you make it work. So once I got it going, I scored this fairly quickly as far as the composition. In about 3 days, like a Friday through Sunday, I just sat down and didn't leave the room except to get a drink of water and take a little rest. But I just really jumped on it. So in about, I'll say, 30 hours of studio time in a really intense session, I did get the movie sort of front to back going. And then,
go on.
And then another week of tweaking and shaping and mixing and stuff like that. But I just blasted away at it.
Are there any specific instruments or tones or whatever that you use to convey different emotions in a horror film as compared to a different type of film?
Well, the piano itself is established as a horror film tool all the way back before even Halloween, back to Bernard Herrmann and all that psycho stuff. So it's piano and strings are kind of I'll call them the standard tools. But then percussion. I used a lot of nice, interesting percussion sounds to keep the thing rolling. So it's like the clock is ticking through the whole team. Somebody's going to die. Somebody's going to die. When's it going to happen? And part of watching it, because I don't know how much you guys talked about it, but it's just two guys, one big, horrific, monster-looking guy that's called Brutal, and then Michael Baldwin's character Carl that's chained to a chair. And Brutal is just doing a number on him. But he's not killing him. He's hurting him. That's all. And that's how the story evolves. And then obviously there's some twists and turns in that stuff as just this action and dialogue go between these two guys. We understand what the situation is. We don't know in the beginning. We just think it's horrific. About midway through, you start getting some clues, and then we do some flashbacks, and we figure out what really happened. So it's well done. Even Michael Stevens had a lot of ideas he wanted to try and do, but in a short schedule on a low budget. Initially, he wasn't pleased with what he shot, and then finally got cut together, and he fooled with the edit a bit, but finally got something that, as he says, something he's proud to show. So for what it is, it's a good effort.
Now, when you said you did the sound effects, what exactly would that be for someone who doesn't know?
Well, there's the normal sound, the sound you would normally expect to hear, people walking around and tools being picked up and run and stuff like that. That's sort of what we call production sound. That's sound that actually is recorded during the filming. But then another layer on top of that, sometimes we call it now sound design, but it's the creation of sound effects. It's the creative use of sound. As an example, right after there's this Sander scene early on, there's a couple drips of blood. Now, the blood doesn't make any sound, but I put sound for it, like a cave dripping, so with a lot of echo and real spacey. I also took advantage of reverbs and echoes, even on the dialogue, to put them in a sort of a surreal space. Think of a Salvador Dali painting. Things are, even though you're looking at stuff, it's a little twisted, it's a little strange, and that helps to tell the story that way, because it was just dry, which is the way I saw the movie in the beginning. It was just flat. So to help with the roller coaster ride. Remember, every good movie has its ups and its downs, and you're on your way up the hill. You get to the top, and oh my God, we're on our way down. So it's going to happen. And you get to the bottom of the hill, we got to climb the hill again. And so to make that happen musically, and then also with sound and sound effects and music, is the whole soundtrack. That's what. And it's the way to do it in an intelligent way is to make it so that the audience doesn't ever think about it. They just go for the ride. And so I think that's a skill that I've perfected in the last 35 years of fooling around with movies.
Yeah. Has the digital age really changed how you do a lot of the sound effects?
Well, the digital age has brought in a tool that does a lot of the what we'll call assistant level work. It used to be that a sound effects crew would be 10 guys, and there would be people dedicated to making copies and transfers and keeping things organized and keeping things in documentation, so that the soundtrack or the sound effects editing would be handed off to a bunch of mixers, and then the mixers would sit there with the producer, and that would be the final mix. Well, in this case, it was just me the whole way. So I was able to cut corners because it was just the same guy. I didn't have to give it to anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So I used a piece of software called Logic, which is a music sequencer that comes with the Macintosh, with the Apple. It doesn't exist on a PC. And so the music was created in there, and then a lot of the sound designs, the effects, the manipulation of the effects were also done in the Logic software. And then ultimately, I outputted the sound tracks, the files, to another thing called Pro Tools, which is sort of the standard film post-production software. So think of Pro Tools as like dollars. That's the common currency for all media exchange in Hollywood. Whereas the Logic is something that's an artist-preferred tool. It could be Cubase, it could be Mark of the Unicorn, this and that. That's based on who wants to play.
Mm-hmm. Now, like earlier in your career, did you ever actually just like go out and like physically film like weird sounds that you would make?
Oh yeah, no, I mean.
Or do you still do that?
You still do that. Actually, I just finished a French film called Dead Shadows, and in this one, it's sort of an apocalyptic comet crash in Paris, and then all of a sudden everybody starts doing mutants and zombies and stuff like that. And I was recording my dog for one of the monsters, and I got him, and then I slow him down, and he goes because he makes these weird noises, and it becomes strange textures. I mean, that's part of the sound effects manipulation, is speeding things up and slowing them down, and also making layers of things. So instead of hearing just one sound, you hear 3 or 4 sounds that are nicely blended together, so you don't hear any one of them individually. You hear this conglomerate of sounds, which you then becomes the sound of whatever you're looking at. Mm-hmm. And then, like, as an example, I did the movie The Hunt for Red October, and I was out recording all kinds of stuff from the underwater perspective because I had all these challenges. I was supposed to make the sound of propellers of a nuclear submarine underwater. Well, where do you get that sound? So I actually took microphones. There's things called hydrophones, which are underwater microphones in the first place, but they're very tinny. They don't have any sort of frequency response. And so I wanted to go for a higher fidelity. So I actually wound up taking studio microphones and putting condoms over them, and then, putting rubber bands at the inside to waterproof them. And I was dropping these studio mics into Long Beach Harbor, recording tankers going by to get what they call the screws or the propeller turns. Mm-hmm. So when you don't have it, you go get it. And also, it's evolved since the 80s. There's now huge libraries of sound effects to pull from. So most things are made from library now because somebody's already gone out and done this. Yeah. But every now and then there's a challenge. And certainly to be original, you want to record some original sound. You want to put something in there that nobody else has. I mean, it's part of the uniqueness. So it's artistic. It's just being an artist and working with your palette and dialing up what seems to be appropriate for the image. When I was in high school, I was really an art student. Music was a hobby. I was going to be a fine arts painter, and I was a president of the art class, all this other stuff. And then, somewhere around the junior high school, I got invited to play in a band, and I got bit by rock and roll, and that was it. I was done with art. I took off on rock and roll, and my band opened for the Who and the Cream and Wheels of Fire and the Tommy Tour, and I worked with Joe Walsh was one of my buddies. This is all in Cleveland, Ohio area. Mm-hmm. So I went on a long musical quest, and then just through the oddest of circumstances, in 1979, this big burly biker buddy of mine named Pax Lemon was working at Paramount, just making copies of tapes, and there was these 2 guys standing behind him going, "Hey man, we really need somebody who knows about synthesizers." And they go, "Oh, you got to talk to my buddy Al. He knows all about that stuff." And they gave my number, and I went down. Turns out they were making Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Wow! And so my first audition, my very first movie was a tape making the sound of the Starship Enterprise going from warp 1 to warp 7, and I just dialed it up in my little dining room studio, turned it in, and I got the prize. That became the sound of the Enterprise, and that set me off on the movie world. That's amazing. And then the picture editor from that first Star Trek movie, fellow named Todd Ramsey, his next movie was Escape from New York, and then he introduced me to John Carpenter, and I found that my art background really paid off well for me to become a sound specialist for film, because I was an image-oriented person. So whenever I see an image, the sound or the music just comes to me. It's no-brainer.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because when I started, obviously not to your level or anything, but when I was doing some audio mixing, whatever, and the guy who was giving me advice told me to look at it in an artistic way, where it's the same way when you're doing graphics, that it's layered. Look at the sounds as layers, and it's kind of interesting you brought that up.
Yeah, it's really how you do it. I mean, I've given some one-day seminars for people that are, at least interested or have passion for movie sound or music. And I'm not cloaked. I don't have a bunch of trade secrets. I'm pretty much willing to open the book and let's start talking about it and share knowledge, because people shared it with me, and I feel obliged to share it with other people. And in the same way that I got involved with Michael Stevens, here comes a young filmmaker with what I see as some really good ideas. I mean, Michael has a tremendous filmic vocabulary. He's watched a gazillion movies, and he knows these things scene by scene and what works with what, and so I saw that in him. So that's why I kind of jumped on board and said, let's get this guy launched. The world needs some new filmmakers, and he's one of them.
Mm-hmm. Is that just fun for you too, to do kind of the old school thing and actually go out and film something?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, we're in the digital age. It's actually we're in the age of self-expression. It was the technology was expensive and complicated, and so before you ever get to roll a 35 millimeter camera, you had to play with 8 millimeter and cut that, and 16 millimeter and do it low budget, and then finally, you had to have a war chest of $25,000 just for your 35 millimeter stock to shoot a movie. So it was very limiting, and it was the same in the audio world too, or especially the music world. The whole recording studio scenario with the mixing console and the 24-track recorder and all the outboard effects and then the source things and the good microphones, all that's been shrunk down to a piece of software now that lives on a laptop. Mm-hmm. So everybody's pretty much got access to this now, and sort of some ways it pisses me off because there was a gate that you had to go through, and I made it through the gate and I could keep everybody out, but I've acclimated to it. I just realized this is a changing world. Everything's changed, so this is the way it is. So let's all play with it. And the good news is I have all these concepts that I created over the last 30 years of playing with this stuff, and so when I open up one of these things, I understand what I want to do with it and where I want to take it, so I can drive these things pretty easy.
Mm-hmm. Annabelle?
Yeah, I was going to ask you a little bit more about the sound effects. Do you feel like you mentioned the libraries where all these sound effects come from now? Do you feel like that takes away? I mean, you've been in the business for a long time, so you've probably been there and done that as far as getting new sound effects and whatnot. But do you feel like that takes away some of the fun of the discovery of having to seek out like that incredibly innovative idea about putting the condoms over the microphones? I mean, you probably don't have to do too much of that anymore.
That's correct. The fun part of the field recording has kind of gone away. Mm-hmm. It was by necessity in an earlier time. Now it would be only if there was something that you're looking for that you just can't find in a library.
Yeah.
Because, recording door slams and car buys and car crashes and dropping dressers to make these crunchy things and chopping trees down and fall in the forest. All these really great digital recorders of high quality are little handheld devices.
Yeah.
So this flow, and also the demand now. A movie of today, especially with CGI, asks for these incredible sounds to be stacked all together with hundreds of tracks. Mm. So that individual little sound effect that you're looking for it's not so special anymore because it's all layers of stuff. So that part is kind of gone. But on a big feature. And I've done plenty of those. I remember when I did Army of Darkness for Sam Raimi. I was a sound designer, editor guy, so I was in charge of all that stuff. And Bruce Campbell and I spent a lot of time before we ever got to even finishing the final cut to make sounds. Twisting leather and making things that we thought would be useful when it came time to do it. Well, all those things are in the library now.
Yeah. Do you feel like it really kind of hurts the artistry of your field? I mean, people still have to obviously pick and choose and layer things and whatnot, but do you think it's kind of, you know, it's kind of sad in a way that that's gone?
I'll use the word sad in that the romance is gone.
Yeah.
But I don't think it makes the end product any different. I mean, I remember when, you know, I started using a word processor versus a typewriter.
Yeah.
And people, oh, you're writing on a computer now. And well, wait a minute, what's the difference between a person writing with a pencil, writing with a typewriter, or using a computer? Ultimately, it's the art form, and the person that drives the final product shapes from whatever tool they've got the end product, and if the end product is satisfactory, you're there.
Yeah. Another sound effect question was, what did you find were your most innovative sound effects? I know you already mentioned one that was super clever, but what are some of the other innovative sound effects you've captured over the years?
Well, you know, when I first started on that first Star Trek, I came from a synthesizer viewpoint. I was an electronic musician, and I had synthesizers and certainly tape recorders, but I would make all these Star Trek effects, right? Because the idea was they could go out and record normal sounds, but what about the sound of an Enterprise? So how do you, what is that, you know? And so I started from a synthesizer viewpoint, but the sound effects editors, two very famous guys, a fellow named Richard Anderson and Stephen Flick, who got Academy Awards and stuff like that, kept coming back and they say, well, it's got to be more organic. It can't just be electronic, because electronic sounds are good for boops and beeps and switches and electronic things, but the sound of a machine doesn't sound like something that comes out of a synthesizer. So right from the beginning, I would take a tape recorder and do field trips to gather organic sounds, and that was before digital sampling, so it was all tape. So I remember having literally loops of tape strung around the room, you know, to make a long loop so it wouldn't repeat itself. And these were sounds of, I went out to Lockheed here at Burbank, the aircraft factory, and somebody got me in there, and then I was allowed to go around and record all the big machines and the blowers and the warehouses. And I remember there was also one air conditioner that was on the Paramount lot, and we called it Room 13, and it was back, and it had this unbelievably great rumble, slow frequency. So when it came to the sound of the Enterprise, again, it was the layering, so it was the combination of the organic and the electronic. Well, now we get into, we come into about 86, 87, and I had a thing called an emulator. It was one of the first digital samplers, and eventually a synclavier system, which was a big gun, very expensive digital sampler. Now you were manipulating digital recordings of organic sounds, and that's what the world is today. So that's why all these libraries can exist. You know, it's your sound files, collections of sound files. We've got super fidelity. We got every way to twist and turn and manipulate that sound file from an organic sound to an electronic and back. So that's the new palette. I mean, it's kind of going from crayons to oil painting. You know, it's just everything's full bore now.
Here from the chat room, Juju B wants to know: have you ever used the Wilhelm scream?
I did not use the Wilhelm scream only because I knew what it was, and my other buddies, Richard Anderson and Stephen Flick, they had this thing where they had to stick a Wilhelm in somewhere. But the Wilhelm scream is actually Ben Burtt, who was the sort of the father of sound design for Star Wars. So he was the guy that came up with all those great starfighters and TIE fighters and stuff like that, manipulating tape recordings at the time. Like the sound of the TIE fighter, it was actually it's an elephant. You know, so he was a guy that had this great idea of taking sounds that don't go with what you're watching. I mean, as far as it's not, you ever see an elephant, you see a ship, but working these things. In fact, the first time we started putting animals into machines was on another earlier movie called Death Race 2000.
I'm a big fan of Death Race 2000. Yeah.
And so he was the guy that had the idea of taking the animal sounds, the lions and the tigers and the elephants, and putting them in as part of the hot rods to make them characters, make them come alive. And so those concepts were there. So back to the Wilhelm. No, I passed on the Wilhelm, although it's kind of fun to think if you could sneak one in, but I didn't. I certainly know where it is, and the Wilhelm is very, very famous. And for those that don't know what a Wilhelm is, it's a man's scream. It's like a right, and so you try to sneak one in there when you know. If it's the right thing, you could do it. But
right.
I'd rather just go and record my own spot, record myself again. I've done sound effects for myself a lot of times.
Yeah. Someday they'll say
I know what I want to do.
Yeah. Someday they'll say that's the Alan scream there.
Yeah. Actually, you know where the Alan scream is. If you remember Raiders of the Lost Ark, when he's in the Well of Souls, and they push the statue over, and you see the first mummy that she goes, Indy, there's a light, and then you cut to the first mummy and goes, ah! That's me.
That's pretty awesome. I think John meant we're actually going to cut out some of your screams here. We're going to use them on the show and feature the show.
You're welcome to. You can use them as tags.
Exactly. Duckman here on the Facebook, he wants to know what was it like working with John Carpenter? And the second question's interesting. How do you feel about movies you worked on being remade with different music?
All right, number one, working with John Carpenter. John Carpenter and I are basically the same age. He's about 6 months older than I. We're also from the same general area. He grew up in Kentucky. I grew up in Ohio. So when I first was introduced to him, it was the most casual guy-to-guy meeting. Like somebody told John there was this guy, Alan, you got to go check him out. He came over to my rented house in Glendale. I had everything set up in the dining room. At the time, for the technology heads, I had like a Prophet 5 and an ARC Quadra and an ARC Avatar. These are like analog synthesizers and a little 8-track recorder that that was my multi-track at the time. And I sat down with John, and I just played him a little of my music and let him touch some of the synthesizers and make some noises. And after 45 minutes, he looks at me and goes, "Let's do it." And it was just that easy. And it was that way the whole time. We were just two guys that got together, kind of kicked back, had a cup of coffee. I was the one who brought into the idea of having videotape to watch the movie, to make the music to, because before that he was from a different camp where you would literally say, "I need a music cue that's 2 minutes and 30 seconds long," and you'd start a stopwatch and go, "I need 100 beats," and you'd do the music sort of with the movie in your mind. But we started synchronizing the movie and the tape recorder, which is commonplace. That's what you do today. But I sort of pioneered that. And he loved that concept. He called it an electronic coloring book. So we could literally just run the movie and just kind of fool around. And all the scores, I mean, occasionally John would come in with a theme that he had worked out on the piano beforehand. But for the most part, we just kind of sat down and improvised and just kind of messed around. And we'd do like a music cue a day and just have a blast. And I think that's reflected in all that music we did together, that it was certainly served the movie, because here you got not only a co-composer in John Carpenter, but also the director and the guy who made the movie. So he knows what he wants. Mm-hmm. So that really cut through a lot of decision making. And actually, talking about decisions, John Carpenter taught me one great thing about being a director, for all you guys out there. He says a good director has two important words in his vocabulary: yes and no. And you use them all the time. Just giving it both ways. I don't know. Let me hear it, and I'll try it that way. He says it's a waste of time and a waste of money. He says just be decisive. Even if you say no, and the next day you come back and say, "I changed my mind," it's yes. That's more efficient and a better way to guide your team than to keep everything wishy-washy. So I just share that with everybody as a gem of wisdom that John Carpenter gave to me, and I try to do that myself all the time. Mm-hmm. But anyhow, it was very casual. We hung out. It was always, the kind of the arrangement was I had the studio and all the gear. John had the movie. He'd call me up and say, "We're doing another one. Come on over." I'm coming over. And he'd bring some videotapes over, and we'd sit down and we just started doing it. I remember when we did Escape from New York, he also walked in with a couple records. Remember, this was vinyl before anything else. He brought in the Police and Tangerine Dream as I kind of like this music. Let's see if we could do anything like this. So that was an initial, vector or guide from him saying, this stuff I like. Let's do something. And not that we copied it, but it gave a direction. So if you remember in the beginning of Escape from New York, we also used electric guitar and I brought a Lindrum, which was one of the first digital drum machines, and got everything working, and we just cranked it out. Mm-hmm. You know, and another interesting comment from John. I remember when I said we wanted to do a soundtrack album from Escape from New York, he looked at me and goes, "Really? People want to listen to that?" Because from his standpoint, it was just utilitarian music. It wasn't like music from the radio, you know. It wasn't even album music. But I said, no, I'm telling you, man, there's something here. So we made that first Escape from New York LP. We sold 80,000 units. It was the biggest selling album that Red Cerebin had at the time. So it just goes to show, when you're making it, you're not thinking about it. You're not thinking you're making something famous or it's going to be a big deal. You're just doing it. And then afterwards, stuff happens.
And his second question was about if they remake a movie and use a different sound. Does that ever bother you?
Well,
the different music.
If they use different music in the sequel, what you're saying, or a remake?
He said remake, but you could sequel's interesting too.
Well, in a remake, you're just kind of stuck. Because the reason you're remaking it, because it was something already successful. For you to take off on another whole thing and put rap beats under a remake of something to make it modern and urban, if it's a good job, it's a good job. I mean, I'm not married to anything, but in the case of a sequel, and this is where I'm going to go down the Halloween trail, my first Halloween was Halloween 2, so I inherited John Carpenter's score from Halloween 1 as the standard. Everything had to be Halloween. But at the time of Halloween 2, John Carpenter was starting up on The Thing. So he literally, in one of our conversations, I remember maybe it was just sitting around in the studio, he said, "Alan, I'm going to be really busy with making this movie The Thing over at Universal. I got no time. You're going to take over Halloween." And that was it. He just sort of handed me the franchise. He said, "Go for it, man." So I sat down and I transferred John Carpenter's original 16 tracks, which wasn't even 16 tracks, it was probably 8 or 10. It was pretty thin, to a 24 track, so I had open tracks. And I literally just dubbed in over John to make the score to Halloween 2. And then we got to Halloween 3, and that was a departure, so that doesn't count. But when it came to Halloween 4, now they invited me back to do the sequel. And the producers wanted that Halloween theme back. They didn't want me to vary. They said that music and Michael Myers goes together. We got to use it. So then Halloween 4, 5, and 6 I did, still recycling the Halloween theme and now taking advantage of the technology and new sound textures and sound effects and instruments and samples. And so I really did my own thing with Halloween, the original Halloween music, now in recordings that I made, without John around. But then when it came to Halloween 7, H2O, they actually, a fellow named John Ottman did an orchestral version of the Halloween theme for the movie, and ultimately they said it didn't work, and they had a big panic, and they got music from Scream and started cutting it in and kind of fooling around in a panic to put it all back in place. But I just don't think the Halloween past Halloween 6 are Halloween anymore. I mean, there's a theme in there, and I know Rob Zombie did his whole thing, and he had to make his mark, and Tyler Bates did a good job. But it's not the same, and I don't think they're successful. I mean, when you got a good thing, if you got a Mona Lisa, why you got to paint a copy of Mona Lisa? Come on, except to sell them cheap.
So it sounds like you had just a great working relationship with John. Is it normal to have that, intense, close working relationship, and how do you negotiate things with other people as far as, this is your idea for the sound and maybe they want to take it in another direction? How does that usually play out?
Well, you've got to take the lead from the filmmaker. Often there's temp music, and these temporary music that's been cut into the movie during the editing process just to screen it. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes that's an indicator of what they're looking for. So to stand there and say, I don't want to do that music like that, I got a new idea, you're allowed to do that. Yeah. But it's at a certain point, you've got to be prepared to sort of go along with the temp too. So they fall in love with this stuff because they've watched the movie with it.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of times they tempted with my own music, which was a piece of cake. But you know, I'm not that adamant that I've got the best idea. Mm-hmm. However, if the filmmaker cuts me loose and doesn't try to over-direct me, they get a better score than if they try to really steer me around. I need this here, and then make sure you hit that. I remember one movie I did that came out pretty good with the director literally just babysitting me all the way through was The Dentist. So when I did The Dentist, Brian Usna really just kind of sat with me. And it wasn't for the purposes of the notes or the music. It was for making the emotional moments happen. He was very adamant that I need something on that look, and I need something when we cut to that there to help the orchestration, the writing to the picture. And so that was successful too. And I've had a couple of guys I want to throw out of the studio, but you know, we get through it, and you know, there's always a deal to be made. And you know, just as for everybody that's out there that eventually you do this for 30 years, I've actually had scores get thrown out too. Wow. I did it, and I thought I was done, and they come back and said, you know, Alan, the score's just not working. We're going to get somebody else. Thank you very much. And you get invalidated, and you kind of crater on yourself, and you go, oh, shit, what did I do? But you realize it's not you. You did your thing, and they've gone it out, and they've showed it to other people, and who knows why, whether it's politics or he's got a buddy that's been wanting to do it all along, and they just, at the first chance to diss on you, they're going to all do that and try to get you out. So it's like a buddy of mine, Harry Manfredini, the guy who did
Friday 13th.
Yeah. Harry says, you ain't nobody till you've been thrown off at least one movie.
What do you do with those bits? Do you end up trying to, like, use them again at some point? If you've got something that you're really in love with and you're like, man, I so wish I could have used it. Is it even possible to use that in another movie, even a little bit, or do you feel like they're just tied in so much with the story for that particular piece?
No, actually, I have two scores that are laying around that I'm going to just make into what we'll call library music.
Oh, okay.
So it's a good piece of music. It's been made. It didn't work for that movie, but it's still music. And there might be somebody coming along with a movie that likes that music for their thing. And at that point, either the arrangements are made that the thing can be licensed directly from me because I own the whole thing, or I go back to, oftentimes when you do a movie, it's a short lesson in music, every piece of music that gets copyrighted has basically two streams to it. One is the writer's rights, and the other is the publisher's rights. So it's split 50-50. So in the case of a score that I own the publishing and I'm the writer. Mm-hmm. In the case of other movies, oftentimes the movie producer will retain the publishing rights, and therefore you need them to want to do something with it, or they could hold up the train.
Oh wow, yeah. That would be frustrating.
So there's a couple things that are still laid around. The other part being, I did a lot of music. Everybody thinks I'm a horror movie guy. You know, I've done a lot of, and I am a horror movie guy, but I've got a larger palette than that. You know, I was with a jazz band called Weather Report in the 70s, some of the best jazz in the world, and I've got a jazz thing. I play saxophone, and then also one of my other clients was the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and I did this whole series, about 8 years worth of nature films, all this beautiful acoustic guitar and flutes and pretty stuff. So, like, remember, as the artist, you put an image in front of me, and I'll make music for that image. Mm-hmm. So besides slashing people up, I've done whales and dolphins and clouds and mountains, and I have a lot of fun with that. In fact, out of that whole nature study, if I digress just temporarily here, I've come across a whole new concept that I'm pioneering that I'm going to call it natural frequency music. So it turns out that the frequencies, the actual cycles per second that we use in music today, was standardized in the year 1925, so that in the world of numbers, the note A has been standardized to be 440 cycles per second. Now, that was done to create a standard so that every piano and tuning fork and guitar and trumpet and whatever, and everybody just tunes to A440. Mm-hmm. Well, historically, there was other reference tunings in the 18th and 17th century, and actually I've come across some stuff that's like 5,000 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I got this tuning actually from the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid.
Wow.
So I actually went and rented the Great Pyramid for 2 hours. It cost me $8,000. I thought, well, that's a deal. Get to really get the pyramid. And I did what's called an acoustic response of the King's Chamber. So I recorded things called pink noise and white noise and tones, and then I calibrated the resonance or the echo of the King's Chamber. And my concept was that room was designed by some genius people. The whole pyramid shouldn't be there. I mean, it doesn't make sense that they could make that thing that time ago. So somebody had some mathematical and acoustic message. So that was where it started. And it turns out that the note A, that's the most resonant one in the King's Chamber, equals 424 cycles per second. So I started on a quest to now retune my instruments and all my scores to this 424 business. Well, it turns out the 424 actually aligns with whale songs and dolphins and birds.
Oh, wow.
And the first tuning fork that was created in the year 1711 by this fellow named John Shore, who was the royal trumpeter in the English orchestra, was tuned to 423.5, which is only a half cycle off. And a lot of the Baroque music is all tuned to this also. So there was another tuning in an earlier time, which I think is more harmonious to the mind and the body resonance than this 440 business. So I've got a whole project I call Raw Music, and there's a website you can go to called ramusic.com, ramusic.com. And the whole thing is there. And I've actually made a little technology where you can upload a file and have the pitch converted from the 440 to the 424. Here what happens. If you like, you can buy a copy for 99 cents. So it's a little evangelism on music.
No, that's fascinating. I think it's very interesting.
I do too. What would you say is the hardest emotion to get across?
Comedy. Hands down. Doing funny music is the toughest thing ever. Funny sound effects is something else, honks and beeps and stuff like that. But to actually sell something, sell a piece of music as comedy, and not have it be corny, which is the other thing. You just want to go honk, like cartoons, but to do something where somebody's doing something funny, and you want to come off and you want to sell it as silly, but you don't want to just oh my God, that's a stupid piece of music.
Right.
That's a tough one. That is really tough. I've had to do it a couple times, and it was very challenging. I wound up listening to circus music for a clue as to how, what kind of music is done, because that was the light and airy thing of circus music and calliopes and stuff like that was a pretty good lead. But these guys that would do movies like Arthur and stuff like that, and even the comedy music now, even we're done with rock. A lot of times, you don't go right on the nose. You don't exactly make the music go to the scene, and sometimes you go against the scene to make it funny. So make something up here real fast. Let's say you're in a car wash, and normally the car wash would be ideal to have some rap music going, and the guys are fooling around, and they're all stoned and drunk, and they're escorting each other, and they're like, but what if you did it to some Mozart? That's a challenge, but it could be that it's even funnier because these guys, this is such an intelligent piece of music, and these guys are so stupid. So there's like I say, it's really a wide open palette to do comedy, and I admire anybody that can do it. I think about a Seinfeld thing. There was those couple.
I was thinking of Seinfeld actually when you brought up comedy.
Yeah. I mean, the guy did a really good job. He did a lot of stuff with a bass guitar. That that's just one guy with a bass. It's not a big orchestra band thing, and it became a recurring theme. It's the internet, the getting in and the getting out of all those scenes in TV. Mm-hmm. So I really respect the guys that do TV comedy music.
Yeah, I don't think it is on the pilot episode, or maybe even a couple of the first episodes, but it is just a few episodes in, and then the rest of the series.
Yeah, it settles in exactly. I mean that's the thing with any series. The first couple are experimental, and then there's a lot of feedback from the network and everybody else watching. We did that, and sometimes they change composers, and occasionally they change an actor or two, pull a character out, put a new one in, and then it settles in, and then they got their magic, and then you don't change it. Just don't share change. You got a formula to make it work.
Mm-hmm. Was Larry David, I think, in an interview said that I think it was his idea for that music, and everyone was against it, and then it ended up being like iconic.
Yeah.
And we're going to be being joined here shortly by Michael Patrick Stevens, the director of Brutal. And I'm just wondering, you've worked with a lot of hungry directors who went on to become really big directors. Is that kind of what you saw in him? Is that why you decided to do Brutal?
Yeah. He's a really likable. Yeah, that is exciting. I mean, look, even when I met John Carpenter, I didn't know who John Carpenter was. I knew he was a director, but I didn't realize he was this big deal, iconic guy to people, because he wasn't at the time. He'd done Halloween and he'd do some groundbreaking stuff, and his next movie he'd done The Fog, and the next thing we're doing Escape from New York, and that was for him a big challenge because he was now going into his first big movie. I mean, there was a lot of challenges and a lot of production, all those helicopters and all that stuff, and a lot of locations, and it was the first time he had $5 or $10 million to play with instead of under $1 million. So he was under a lot of stress. So it's funny. Carpenter used to say that doing the music for his own movie was like going on vacation, because he could turn the phone off. You tell everybody to stop talking to me right now. I'm doing the music, and you could shut down for a half a day or a day and stay in the studio with me and just have some fun, and then go back to all the directorial producer business. Mm-hmm. But another guy I worked with early on was Michael Bay. There was a movie called Sleepwalkers. Maybe it had cats in it. I was doing all the cat effects.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember that one.
A long time ago, and James Cameron was the special effects guy on Escape from New York. I mean, everybody's got to start someplace. I remember doing work with James Horner on Battles Beyond the Stars, when that was his first chance to really fire up an orchestra.
Wow.
So I've been very blessed. I work with the best of the best. I work with Spielberg and Zemeckis and Carpenter and all these guys on all these big movies. And all I can say is when you're around those people and it's at that level, it's all normal again. It's crazy with the people in between, the people that are fighting and gnashing and grabbing to get up on their careers and stuff like that. Well, when people come in and they're casual and they know what they're doing, it's the most fun. And I saw that in Michael Patrick Stevens. He's got it. He's got good ideas. He's just waiting for a break, and I really think we got something with Brutal to get him launched.
Mm-hmm. You said about having fun too. If you find someone else who's creative and is it easier for you to bounce ideas off each other?
Yeah, that's a lot easier to bounce ideas. Another young director, and I hope he comes out of the woodwork at some point, is a fellow named Anthony C. Ferranti. I did The Headless Horseman with him, and I met him back on The Dentist. He was the special effects guy. So he's another guy that's got some very intelligent horror movies. I want to see him get launched at some point. Mm-hmm. You tend to keep relationships or contact or some line with people that you like, and then that's who you work with again. There's other people you go, I never work with that guy. He's a jerk.
We get any names on there?
I wouldn't want to do that, but they do exist. I'll say that.
All right. But also your website's alanhowarth.com.
Yes, alanhowarth.com. And I got, just as a plug for me, I sell all my movie soundtracks there, and if you buy them there, I actually personally autograph every one. So it's a bonus that you get one. You can turn around and buy it for $25 and sell it on eBay for $35 the next day if you want.
Exactly. Make some cash. Or good advice.
Exactly.
It sounds like you yourself are a horror fan.
I enjoy. I've been around it so much. I'm a science fiction horror guy. Mm-hmm. It's fun, and I really understand the genre now, and hence why the score to Brutal just fit like a glove to what was the image. Michael couldn't believe the change in his movie from before and after it was scored. Mm-hmm. And I actually had to sit him down because he was having all kinds of trepidations over it didn't come out the way I wanted it, and I was going to do it this way, and and I really don't like it. And I said, Michael, I just finished scoring your movie. I'm going to send it to you. I want you to take a deep breath, do whatever you got to do to chill out, and stop worrying about this and just watch your own movie. And he called me back. He was literally in tears, going, "Man, I can't believe you saved my movie. This is unbelievable. I couldn't imagine that the music would change it this much." But the music really smooths over all the rough edges and takes you for a ride. That's the whole point. From the beginning to end, the movie is a ride. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we got.
Is that ever hard to deal with as an artist? Maybe that if you do like artwork that someone sees and they know they painted that, or an actor's on a camera that they know that's that actor, that maybe not everyone, your name might not be a household name, they know that you did the music, but yet you're proud of that art?
Oh, I don't care if they know I did it or not. I mean,
I guess it would be a different person. You don't have that personality then that you really want.
Yeah, the personality. You know, I got to tell you, by now I'm really comfortable being me. I'm okay with that, and I like me. Actually, I don't have a problem with myself. And so, like I said, in the last 4 or 5 years, people come to me and they don't try to ask me or direct me to do the score. They literally just cut me loose. And when they do that, they get a really good score. Mm-hmm. And I just do everything that I like. And because I like it, I wouldn't let it out if I didn't like it. And then they come in and go, "Oh my God, I can't believe you did this." So that's the best. Everybody would dream to be that way. I mean, imagine that the young composer is up against somebody who says, "I need a score just like Hans Zimmer, but you got to do it for $5." And that's what happens. Mm-hmm. And there's guys that pull us off. I mean, they give their heart and soul to this stuff, and they pull every favor in the book, and they live on borrowed money, but they're trying to get launched, so they'll do that stuff. But it doesn't really advance their career, other than they got a movie. Mm-hmm. I mean, sooner or later they're going to have to find their own voice and sound like themselves, and that takes a while. You don't know that stuff in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Well, we really thank you for coming on tonight.
You're great, great guys. Glad to be here. I'm glad we had some fun on the air. Huh. And so just as the tag, AlanHowarth.com for following up on my film scores, and then for a little adventure, RAmusic.com for the whole natural frequency concept.
Cool. And we'll put the links right up on the website.
Cool, man.
Yes. Then they can just click it. It'll be like magic. We'll take them right to the site.
Excellent. We'll have fun.
Yeah.
Have fun with Michael. Beat him up.
All right.
All right, you all go to withoutyourhead.com. I'll come over there and put my boot up in your ass.
Hi, this is Adrienne Barbeau. Just call me Billy. Everyone does. And you're listening to Without